On this lucky 13th episode of the Mendez Movie Report Podcast, we will be talking all things the Odyssey, easily the biggest news of this past week in film. The Odyssey is its explosion both at the box office and in cementing itself as the clear Oscar frontrunner at this stage of the race. We plus the Avengers Doomsday trailer. The Paramount and Warner Brothers merger bumps into a major legal hurdle. NYFF and Venice announced their opening films, as well as some announcements from TIFF. Uh, I will be addressing the loss of Brenda Fricker, and as always, the latest box office news, along with what's coming next to theaters and streaming. I really thought this would be a pretty straightforward episode this week. Just going to review the Odyssey. Probably not much else to say after that. But it has ended up being a wild weekend of a lot of news coming in. So let's get straight to it. Now, before we get to the stuff that I was supposed to be covering for this episode, I did want to quickly talk about, I guess you could say, breaking news that happened on this day of recording day on Monday. Um, we got a brand new trailer of of the new Avengers Doomsday movie, which is slated to come out on December 18th, on the same day as Doom Part 3, which of course led to people referring to it as Doomsday. Um, and I don't, I haven't been covering trailers on this podcast, and even though I probably should be, but unfortunately, the situation with my home life and how I really gotta make miracles happen for me to get any podcast through hell to write any of my reviews. I'm making a miracle happen. Um, but I did want to go ahead and cover this one because I think it's kind of fascinating to see the divisive response to this trailer. 10 years ago, I would have been beyond excited to see a new trailer for Avengers Doomsday. And I, there was actually a point where I was considering the MCU at its peak to be potentially one of the greatest things that we've ever gotten from cinema. And they had some movies that were making it not just on my best of the year list, but fairly high on my best of the year list. And it's not like, just because I feel like the MCU as a whole has lost quality, that I necessarily think, you know, I'm gonna start declaring that the that those past movies weren't among my favorites of the year. They are, because I do think that they were sort of this peak moment from the franchise where we got better quality films from them. But since post Endgame, it's been very hit or miss. There have been even a few of these movies that I've straight up have not liked, which I never thought would be possible before. Because, like, for instance, a lot of people consider Iron Man 2 to be a weak point early on in the franchise. I actually have a lot of fun with Iron Man 2. I actually personally rank Iron Man 2 higher than Iron Man 1. And I know that's an incredible hot take from me, but it's the truth. I think Thor: The Dark World is a decent movie. I mean, I wish I had a better villain, but I thought it was a pretty decent movie for the most part. Um, but lately, even I have had my limits in defending their stuff. I didn't like the Marvels. I didn't like the fourth Captain America. A lot of their movies I've just been okay on at best. Have there been some highlights, since Endgame? Yeah, I mean, No Way Home is definitely one of my faves of 2021. I am a Thor: Love and Thunder defender. Um, I the third Guardians made my best of the year for 2023. I did really like Thunderbolts and Fantastic Four. They just ended up not being able to get into my best of the year list last year. So it's not like I've hated everything that's happened since Endgame, and Shang-Chi's another one. I really had a lot of fun with Shang-Chi. But the problem is that these movies have been so inconsistent. They haven't really built up to something proper, and it hasn't really led me to a point where I'm connecting with the plot and the characters and the feeling that we're all on this ride so that it could feel like, when you're going up the roller coaster before it dips and the ride begins. In the past, it felt like we were going up, 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 and then the Avenger movies would be this exciting ride down, down, going down. And unfortunately, I just haven't been having that feeling in the lead up to this Avengers movie. And the trailer hits today, and I couldn't believe how ambivalent and apathetic I was to it. And again, people will brand me as an MCU hater, even though I have given positive reviews to a couple of their movies since Endgame. I've even put a couple of them in my best of the year list, but I've sat there watching it and I'm like, all I am seeing here is a bloated cast or farming, say making you go, look who it is, trying to hit nostalgia bait, and it just didn't work for me at all. And I'm not alone because I've seen other people who feel that's exact same way. And I just, based on some of the things that I've heard about behind the scenes, that supposedly they were writing this as they went, some of the plot leaks that have gotten out there, I think this has the potential to be a low key disaster. And at best, I think just something that's okay. Um, it is gonna be fascinating to see how this does at the box office. Now, I will say this, I do think this is going to make major money at the box office, but I do wonder if it's gonna have weaker legs than past Avengers movies have. On top of that, I've noticed that a lot of the people out there who are actually excited by not all of them, but there are certain hardcore MCU folks out there that are still holding on to the franchise. But a lot of them seem to be people who they maybe have only watched one or two MCU movies since Endgame. And it's kind of like, yeah, I can see why you might be getting excited for this if you haven't really been following the lackluster buildup that we've been on over these last 7 years. The mess that was Phase 4, the inconsistency that we've been getting from Phase 5. Um, so I can see why they feel that way, to where they feel better to be excited about this. I just can't do it. And I gotta tell you, watching this trailer, for the visuals look bland, which is, again, I legit, I've talked about this before. I can forgive mediocre visuals if everything else works. Like, I adore, the first Wicked film, the second Wicked film is the top three for me of that year. I can forgive the mediocre visuals. But when you have mediocre visuals and you're not really selling me on anything else as well, I just it's very hard for me to get excited for this, and it is fascinating to see the divisive response. I wonder how many people are trying and hoping that this will be a brand new boost for the MCU, and how many of us are just become cynical to it. I'm definitely more cynical to it, even though I'm not an MCU hater. I haven't been one of these folks who are like giving constant negative reviews to every new MCU movie that's been dropping over the last 7 years. So I will say that. Now, um, that being said, I howled so much when I noticed the Infinity Vision thing that they slapped on at the end of this trailer, because Doom 3 is going to own the IMAX screens for a few weeks. And clearly Disney was trying to bully Dune 3 to change their date by moving their date there to December. And Dune 3 would not budge. Dune 3 has the IMAX screens. Dune 3's been doing the big trailer events. WB's aggressive about it. Where this is that this WB does believe that they can have a Return to King style narrative for this movie for award season. It is my second most anticipated film of the year that we have left over, only behind Godzilla minus zero. Whereas I can't even say that Doomsday is among my most anticipated. I mean, like, I would have to like get into like past a bunch of movies that refer to it as an anticipated film. It's a movie I'm curious about, but I would not say I'm excited or anticipating it with too greatly. But because of that, because Dune does have that situation with where they have the IMAX screens to themselves, what's happening is that um D- Disney's doing some cheap thing where they're saying they're taking any premium format. So like if it's a Screen X, if it's a Dolby or something like that, 4DX, I guess, and they're declaring it this is Infinity Vision. This means that this has been um given the rubber stamp of approval by Disney. I think this is the most cringe thing I've ever seen in their attempt to get people to show up because they know they're gonna have Dune 3 is gonna have all the IMAX screens. But I don't want to keep rambling on about this because again, I don't as much as I would like to, I don't typically cover trailers. But this was such a huge event and such a talking point this morning of this day that I'm recording on Monday, that I did feel like I did with having a mic in front of me. I wanted to make some comments about it. Those of you out there who are legitimately excited for this, I wish I was there with you. I would love for this movie to completely prove a lot of us wrong, but this trailer did not get me excited. What I am excited for when it comes to December 18th, and I will be there day one though, is Dune 3, which doesn't need to use any cheap Infinity Vision crap to get people to show up. They're gonna be on IMAX. That's all you need to know. Okay? Okay, so man, that Infinity Vision thing, God Almighty, just speaks volumes about where the MCU is nowadays. But hey, again, I do think this movie's going to make a lot of money. I question if it's going to hit $1 billion, but it is going to make a lot of money. The question again, though, is it's going to have the quality to get a lot of legs. Okay, now we can talk about the real biggest news item of this past week, in particularly the weekend, and that is the Odyssey, Christopher Nolan's latest new film. We've been people have been talking about this movie for a long time now, and we are finally getting it. And I will say, I got to see this at a press screening on Monday, right after I recorded the last episode's podcast. Um, and I got to see it in 70 millimeter. I then rewatched it um 2 more times after that in the last week. So I've seen the movie 3 times as I record this. I did not I, I did not try to find an IMAX 70 millimeter, even though I do live pretty close to a theater that does have IMAX 70 millimeter. I generally don't do IMAX. I think I've talked about this before because it messes with my vertigo. But I did get to see it in 70 millimeter. I've seen it in the other 2 times for standard digital format and stuff like that. But I have seen the movie, and if you follow me on social media, you already know my thoughts on the film and how exuberant I am about it. So let's get straight to it. If you, for whatever reason, aren't aware, you can read my review over on the Substack. The plot via Letterbox, even though apparently they changed this since I wrote this down, but via Letterbox, the plot of the Odyssey reads as Odysseus, the legendary king of Ithaca, embarks on a long and perilous journey home following the Trojan War. Throughout his voyage, he is forced to confront the whims of gods, mythological monsters, and trials that stretch both his cunning and his humanity to the breaking point. I do not believe that it is a controversial take to assert that the Odyssey, which chronicles the epic tale of Odysseus and his years-long journey home after the events of the Iliad, is potentially the greatest story ever told. I mean, like with the exception of maybe certain religious texts and the decade-spanning manga masterpiece that is One Piece, it's arguably the story of all stories. And I can see why, because it is easy to find yourself rooting for one man as he, crosses treacherous seas, dodges sea monsters, deals with Cyclops, survives encounters with witches and gods, and has all these different trials. Also, that he can return home to the wife he loves. It's a classic adventure story, and it contains a little bit of everything that we crave in our stories. It's got action, it's got romance, it's got mythology and lore, suspense, larger than life characters, terrifying monsters. It just has a lot of timeless themes. It is a tale that has survived centuries. It's gone through it's weathered the rise and fall of empires. It has remained relevant through all these centuries because it truly is that damn good a story. And sometimes I wonder if any original film from the past 150 years of cinema's history will endure as long as Homer's poem has. And yet, bringing this story to the silver screen has been a daunting task, one that many great directors have avoided altogether. Um, there have certainly been attempts to create definitive screen adaptations. Um, 1911, Laodicea, remarkably still exists today, a silent film. Anyone can watch it in the public domain. Kirk Douglas in 1954's Ulysses, a film that made a lot of changes in the source material. They also lean more into the Roman names rather than the Greek names. Um, the Coen brothers had a very loose satirical reimagining of the story. They set into the Depression era, 2000s, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And I've seen all of those that I just mentioned. And while I enjoyed each to varying degrees, none are close to what I would call a definitive adaptation of the tale. There are two TV miniseries, one European, one American produced. And technically, the American produced one is honestly it's honestly a glorified miniseries that's really they just took a 3 hour movie and turned it into two big TV events. But those I think are the best adaptations that I've seen on screen. Um, And look, even as large scale epics return to prominence in the 21st century, we've had Lord of the Rings, we've had Gladiator, and yet nobody seemed willing to summon the testicular fortitude necessary to tackle the Odyssey. The closest we came was 2004's Troy, which is an adaptation of the Iliad and received mixed reviews. It's got respectable, but not really that high, not really rave reactions from audiences. So even with the modern filmmaking technology, many just thought that the Odyssey was simply unfilmable. The story was too vast, covered too many years, contained too many side characters and subplots, and it presented too many trials for Odysseus to overcome to be shot on screen. It was basically too epic. Well, enter Christopher Nolan, the man who directed a superhero trilogy that many consider among the greatest ever made, including The Dark Knight, which is frequently mentioned in conversation about the greatest film of the 21st century, definitely in the conversation of the greatest superhero film of all time. The man who delivered a space exploration epic with Interstellar that some consider to be alongside 2001: A Space Odyssey in quality and reverence. This is the man who turned a 3 hour drama about the inventor of the atomic bomb into a near $1 billion box office phenomenon with Oppenheimer, which ultimately went on to win Best Picture with the Oscars that year. Does Nolan have his skeptics? Yes, he does. There are those who feel like his films can lack thematic depth. Does he have reoccurring criticisms? Yeah. There are more than a few critics, particularly to be frank, female critics have argued that the women in his frankly male-dominated filmography are underwritten. Now, I will say, I personally don't have an issue with the way he writes women, but I'm a boring straight guy. I mean, I could be completely not locking into what maybe something could be much better written female characters. Does he have his stumbles? Of course. Even though I personally vouch for a couple of them, there are plenty of viewers who came away underwhelmed by some of his ambitious swings, like, say, Tenet. I think Tenet's easily one of the best films of 2020, and in my personal opinion, and this is a real hot take, I think it's the best directed film of 2020. But there's a lot of other people that feel like it's maybe their pick for Nolan's one miss with them. So Nolan isn't without flaws. He's not beyond debate when it comes to his storytelling choices. He's not beyond his criticisms, okay? But his body of work speaks loudly enough that he has amassed a legion of fans who believe he belongs in the conversation for the greatest director of his generation, if even some would even go on to say a full time. As full disclosure, I am among them. I truly do not believe that Nolan has made any movie that is worse than something I'd give a B plus review to. Personally, the only filmmaker, or at least living filmmaker, I should say, that I would rank above him is Paul Thomas Anderson. So keep that in mind as I tell you, go deeper here with my review. And it is fitting that after finally adding one of his films to the Best Picture canon, that Nolan has chosen to take on the story of all stories. This epic that has outlived kingdoms and dynasties and entire civilizations throughout time, this supposedly unfilmable tale, it's just the exact kind of challenge one would expect him to embrace. Nolan has never been a filmmaker afraid of taking risk or thinking on the largest scale possible. Even his harshest detractors would probably concede that point. His decision to adapt Homer's masterpiece feels completely in character and on brand for him, and thus we have Christopher Nolan's latest film, The Odyssey. This is a nearly 3-hour film that attempts to condense a story that literally spans 2 decades. It has to communicate a juggling act of following Odysseus' dangerous adventures, flashbacks to the great victory of Troy, and the ongoing drama back home where his family awaits him while ill intentioned suitors desecrate his home. And keep in mind, once again, that we are talking about a story featuring giants, cyclops, sea monsters, witches, and gods. It's a lot. It is a lot to take in. And during the first act, you can see that because I can absolutely see what some viewers are going to find the film a little bit clunky in the first act and uneven as it tries to take root, especially given Nolan's signature nonlinear storytelling, which he does use in this movie. I do think this messy start will be much easier to forgive on rewatches because once the story takes root and the second act arrives, that's when Nolan's magic really starts to work wonders. And when you rewatch it, you'll know what's coming. And you might even catch some things from the first act that you didn't last time that helps things connect better when you see what it was trying to set up. That's certainly my experience after watching it the second and third round. If you're coming for the kind of grand spectacle found in the Sword and Sandal classics that I personally fell in love with growing up watching TCM, this movie does absolutely deliver. The world of Homer's tale comes to life through impeccable filmmaking across so many disciplines. The direction is Nolan operating at its peak. The costumes and production design are lavish and completely immerse you in the film, regardless whether they're historically accurate, which quite frankly they're not. But I gotta be honest with you, I didn't give a damn. Ludwig Göransson delivers yet another incredible score. The sound design and large scale set pieces are phenomenal. Jennifer Lame's editing is propulsive and masterful, much as it was in Oppenheimer, which that editing in Oppenheimer should go down in history and be taught in film school. By the time the credits rolled, I did feel like I had just experienced what it would have been like to watch the Ten Commandments or Ben Hur on the big screen when they first premiered back in the 50s. If nothing else, I hope we can all agree that this film's craftsmanship is an extraordinary example of collaborative artistry. Now, what about the ensemble? The ensemble is outstanding. I truly found every single performer here, no matter how big or small the role, they have brought their A game. Matt Damon delivers a compelling performance as the King of Ithaca, the genius whose cunning ended the Trojan War. He conveys such a wide range of emotions that I completely bought him as both a brilliant general and a ruler who is ultimately humbled by the gods for his hubris and tragically loses a part of himself in the process. It's hard for me to picture anyone else in the role now, which is interesting considering how meh I kind of was on the casting decision at first. So kudos to Matt Damon for that. Anne Hathaway gives Penelope such admirable nuance that I completely believe her husband will go through hell and back to return to her. Tom Holland, as Odysseus' son, Telemachus, seems to be receiving mixed reactions. Apparently, Variety even referred to him as the worst performance in the film. I've seen other people say that. But for me, I actually thought this was the best performance of his career so far. I was genuinely impressed. Robert Pattinson, exceptional as the villainous and Antonius, fully embracing the role in a way that is so effective that all three times I've seen this movie, the audience has applauded when karma finally comes for him. Himesh Patel also has a strong impression as Eurylochus, commanding every moment he's given. But it doesn't stop there with the ensemble. The supporting ensemble is filled with smaller performances that still leave a lasting impact. John Leguizamo gets an opportunity to show off his dramatic chops. He is the MVP of this film. Samantha Morden steals the show with a horrifying sequence that had me wincing in my seat. Charlize Theron completely sells the idea that a man would spend years stranded with her on a deserted shore. Maya Goth serves as a fascinating foil to Hathaway. Lupita Nyong'o, who was subject to some of the most ridiculous racist attacks online, she pulls double duty and in limited screen time reminds everyone exactly why she has that Oscar on her resume. John Bernthal is excellent as a man haunted by his past and paranoid about the future. And in subsequent viewings, I realized that as Menelaus, he is honestly a dick, which I think is the point. Corey Hawkins, who always seems to find a way into my favorite films of the 2020s, he deserves praise for an effective villainous turn of his own. Benny Safdie, he feels imposing without even showing his face. A lot of aura farming for him thanks to the incredible armor he had on. Um, Elliot Page, who also was on the receiving end of some disgusting transphobic attacks. Elliot Page deserves none of the nonsense criticism with his casting. He delivers a genuinely tragic and affecting performance. Zendaya makes every moment count, and a major turn involving her character did get a big gas from me in my first screening of the film. I could go on and on. This is one of the great ensemble achievements I've seen on screen, much in the way Oppenheimer succeeded through the strength of its own massive cast. The story itself, once again, takes time to settle during the first act as we come to understand the situation in Ithaca and exactly where Odysseus finds himself before the film shifts into high gear and the long journey home begins. Even knowing full well where these characters are destined to end up, I found myself fearing for Odysseus and his men. I was on the edge of my seat every time they encountered danger and hoped they all would get home, even though I knew what was going to happen. The journey home contains some incredible sequences that allow Nolan to flex muscles we don't often get to see from him. A man-eating cyclops, a disturbing body horror sequence, terrifying sea monsters, an eerie conversation with the deaf. There are moments here that feel closer to horror than traditional epic adventure sword and sandal filmmaking. The third act is where everything finally comes together for me. It's where the heart of this film truly reveals itself. It's where the movie dares to go deeper, not only examining the epic adventure our protagonist has endured, but also placing under a microscope how his actions changed the world in ways that will haunt us potentially forever. War is not pretty. The means by which you achieve victory do not always earn you the rewards you think they will. Redemption for past sins does not come with putting Pandora back in the box. Sometimes fighting your fate causes more damage than accepting it. For those who argue Nolan's films lack thematic depth, I simply can't agree after seeing where this story ultimately goes in the final act. But the most important question you, the listener, probably once answered is, will you be entertained? Will you enjoy the experience you're paying a hefty ticket price for while working your way through an extra large popcorn bucket that your doctor will probably advise against? And washing it down with a giant soda. Is it worth that experience? Yes. If you simply want to go on a ride, be entertained, and share in a communal theatrical experience as you and the rest of the audience root for Odysseus to finally make it home, you will have a great time. At the end of the day, this is a crowd pleasing summer blockbuster that succeeds exactly what it sets out to do, and I suspect many of you will be revisiting it more than once. I certainly will. So clearly, I did the Odyssey. Yes, I am definitely a Nolan head. Yes, I admittedly am someone who loves epic films like this. But when it comes to evaluating a movie, I ultimately fall back on my own experience with it. Can I nitpick some adaptation changes I wish Nolan hadn't made? Absolutely. Can I point to aspects of the first act that were clunkier than the significantly stronger remainder of the film? Of course. But at the end of the day, how did this movie make me feel? How did it age with me over the two following days after my press screening, and so on and so forth? As I continue thinking about it, the answer is simple. This is now my personal favorite film of the year. This is one of my favorite films of the decade. I would place it alongside masterpieces like Ben-Hur and the Ten Commandments. I would even dare to say that this may be my personal favorite Christopher Nolan film, standing shoulder to shoulder with The Dark Knight. Speaking only for myself, I believe Nolan has achieved something that audiences will continue watching long after both he and I are no longer on this planet. This is for me, and I've seen it now 3 times, so I do feel this way for sure. A masterpiece in storytelling. This is a masterpiece in storytelling. It's the kind of film that will define Nolan's legacy, just as his other great works have. And because of that, I have to give it the highest grade I can. I am giving this an S tier grade. This is an Odyssey worth taking again and again, and many audiences will be taking it through Nolan's film for years to come, in the same way past audiences did for so long, reading Homer's masterpiece. So, the too long didn't listen part of this review is that pros: impeccable filmmaking in so many facets of presenting a motion picture, from the direction, the crafts, the score, the editing, and practical visual effects. Entire ensemble brings its A game. An incredible third act that brings things together to a crowd pleasing climax. The definitive film adaptation we've gotten to is arguably the story of all stories. This is Nolan's Ben-Hur or the Ten Commandments. Now, are there cons? Nolan's non-linear storytelling might make the first act a little clunky for some first-time watchers, and adaptation changes in the story might be a nitpick for purist lovers of the source material. But in other words, I cannot recommend to you this movie high enough. Go and see The Odyssey. It is, in my opinion, the best movie of the year so far, and it is a movie that has the chance to become one of the great old time epic classics. Now, as for the past weekend in new movies, obviously You just heard me talk about it. The biggest new release of this past weekend, and arguably the biggest release of the entire year, was The Odyssey, Christopher Nolan's latest masterpiece, ended the last few weeks of box office struggles for major titles as it premiered to more than 250 million worldwide. It looks like the number is going to be just under 264 million to be exact. It has already made back its production budget and is on track to challenge for that $1 billion mark, depending on legs. The film has been met with raves from critics, earning a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes and 89 on Metacritic. Audiences are giving it some of the strongest scores I've seen from them since Project Hail Mary earlier this year. 97% on the popcorn meter actually has gone up since my weekly digest write up of this, but a 4.4 now on the letterbox last I checked, 8.4 IMDb. And keep in mind, that's with a lot of bad faith 1 out of 10 reviews. And of course the rare A cinema score. And again, you just listened to my enthusiastic review of the film. It has been catapulting to the position of the movie to beat for my favorite film of the year so far. I will also give a shout out to Day Fight, a straight to Disney Plus and Hulu release that quietly arrived as counter programming for those who decided to stay in rather than make the trek to see The Odyssey, the film based on the real life story of a former convict who became a kids boxing instructor. It has been met with negative reviews from critics. Last I checked, a 42% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 46 on Metacritic. Audiences have been similarly underwhelmed. Last I checked, the film had a lowly 5.5 on IMDb. Could not gain any traction last I checked on the other major movie logging sites. So I can't give you a number for that. Look, I can understand the cold reception to this movie, as the movie does often feel like a bland and forgettable, cheap made for TV movie. Um, but look, Andre Holland gives it everything he has in this role in the lead, and I found myself legitimately invested enough to want to see this redemption story play out. Um, so because of that, I did end up barely positive on the film. I'd give it a very soft B minus. And I believe this was shown at the Tribeca Film Festival on top of that. But look, I get it. The movie can play very boring. You could tell how cheaply made it was because there was this one news segment that was clearly cheaply put on there with graphics, the graphics on there. But I don't know. I was locked into the redemption story of this guy. Andre Holland was really great as always. He always gives it his all. I can't wait to see him in bigger and better movies. But I have to say I like this. And if you're into boxing, if you're generally into those redemption stories, or a guy going through rough times, teaching kids a couple things, those kind of movies, you might be more on the positive side of this one than everyone else seems to be. Okay, now what about the next week in new movies? All of the major studios apparently wanted to steer clear of what's likely to be strong legs from The Odyssey. They ended up correctly getting that right. So I would argue that the biggest release of next weekend is actually Netflix's 72 Hours, a Kevin Hart comedy about a middle aged man who accidentally finds himself invited to a bachelor party being thrown by a group of much younger guys. But it's not just going to be Netflix coming out with a straight to streaming comedy. Apple TV is going to be doing their own type of counter programming with its own with The Dink, a comedy about a washed up tennis player who turns to pickleball in an effort to save his country club. It boasts a pretty impressive ensemble of recognizable names, like Ben Stiller's in this. That name comes to mind. And I will be interested to see whether this or the aforementioned 72 Hours ends up earning the stronger reactions from critic and audiences. The only major theatrical release of note will be Neon's Her Private Hell, an eerie near future thriller about a young woman and man who find themselves struggling to survive after a mysterious mist engulfs their city. The film screened at Cannes and was met with some rough reviews, very divisive reactions. So I'll be fascinated to see where it plays better, whether it plays better now that it's making its way into theaters. And reaching a wider audience. So it's going to be a very, very quiet upcoming weekend for movies. Again, the biggest movie of the weekend is arguably some straight to Netflix Kevin Hart movie. That kind of speaks volumes. Now, I did plan to and wrote down, even wrote reference to it in the latest weekly digest that you can read on the Substack. I'm going to talk about the Paramount and Warner Brothers merger because it did hit a potential detour this past week as it ran into a number of legal hurdles. And first of all, one of them is that a coalition of states has come together to sue in an effort to block the merger with claims of antitrust violations. Second, a group has come together to sue in an effort to block the merger. So a couple of shareholders apparently, and so that's one of them. And third, the FCC chairman, Brendan Carr, has been accused of accepting gifts from Paramount to help push the merger through. That is not entirely shocking to me when you consider the politics surrounding the deal and the Ellison's ties to Trump. Personally, I think all of this is probably just delaying the inevitable, but I would be more than happy to see events conspire to block this horrid deal altogether. Well, do I got great news for me? Because today, on the day that I'm recording this on Monday, the 20th, news broke that the deal has been temporarily paused because a judge found that the concerns of these states, that there are some antitrust violations here, might just be might be some basis to them. This is massive because again, when I wrote in the weekly digest yesterday, yesterday from the day I'm recording this, about the way that things were going with these legal woes, and I thought they were kind of blocking off the inevitable, and they still might be. But to have this kind of breaking news happen, this is impressive. Like whoever finally called this in, kudos to you. Um, but you know, this is such a shady deal on so many levels that I would love to see it stop, and I still think it's probably not going to be stopped. But good Lord Almighty, this is a ray of hope for people who do still think that they can be stopped. Massive, massive breaking news there of the merger. And here's the thing: if David Ellison cannot get this merger through by September 30th, he's going to owe WB a ton of money. So the question is, can you continuously pressure him so that September 30th comes and he has no interest in paying that money and he drops the deal? Unless he can't do that. I mean, maybe I'm not aware that he can't do that, but it's pretty clear to me that the way things have suddenly shifted, that it is now not that impossible that this merger might not happen. So we need to keep an eye on it. NYFF, the New York Film Festival, announced that Neon's Paper Tiger, which was met with good but not great reviews out of Cannes, will open this year's festival. NYFF openers tend to have a pretty strong track record when it comes to award season, and with Neon already having Fjord and All of a Sudden looking like a major Best Picture plays, it's a fascinating choice that makes me wonder if we're underrating this movie's chances of becoming a significant player in the race. Now, apparently, there's still a chance that it might show up at Venice. It doesn't look like it's going to show up at TIFF, and it doesn't look like it's going to show up at Telluride. So that kind of worries me a little bit. But, you know, NIF openers historically can do pretty well in the award scene. So it's definitely an interesting decision that I'm going to be keeping an eye on as to what that movie can be. Now, if you remember the last time I did projections, I didn't have the movie that particularly high, but it has been sort of quietly climbing up as some things start to drop off. But I'm gonna need to see it before I believe it. But this is a really interesting and curious choice by NIF as to what they were gonna open their festival with. And speaking of festival openers, Danny Boyle's Inc., which will explore the rise of the Murdoch Empire, and which I could have sworn was going to have to be published the next year, was going to getting pushed to next year. That's why I took it off my Best Picture board for the last update. It has been announced that it will be the opening film for the Venice Film Festival. And Venice openers have frequently gone on to become legitimate awards contenders. So it's a development that makes me want to put the film back on my board. Um, and to add to that, Netflix did pick it up. And with the Black Ball already looking like a major awards contender for them, I do wonder what their strategy for Ink will be if it breaks out in a big way at the festival. But that's where things get interesting when it regards Ink. Why is it interesting? Well, because Ink is not just showing up at Venice, it is also showing up apparently at the TIFF Festival, the Toronto Film Festival. Today, gala and special presentation slates were announced for TIFF. And big props to Matt Neglia over at Next Best Picture for putting this thing together. So these are the films that you can be expecting at TIFF this year. Under the umbrella of the gala presentations, we have A Talent for Murder, All About Coraline, Always Like La Lisa, Atonement, Babies, Being Human, Bunker, Diary of a Mad Old Man, Evil Genius, Girl Group, Man in Motion, the Rick Hansen story, Misty Green, Onward and Sideways, Pretenders, Prima Facie, Run Terry Run, Spirit Guardians, The Last Scene of the First Emperor, Tensing, The Assassin, The Life and Death of Wilson Shedd, The Only Living Pickpocket in New York, Up Against It, Villeneuve, The Rise of a Legend. Among the special presentations for TIFF, we have A Long Winter, All of a Sudden, All That She Wants, Alpha Gang, Bad Lieutenant Tokyo, Bitter Christmas, Clarissa, Club Kid, Coward, Elsinore, Everest the Other Side, Everybody Wants to F Me, Faith, Fjord, Gentle Monster, Glaxo, Growth of the Soul, Happily Ever After, Hombre al Agua, or Man of the Water, I Play Rocky, In Alaska, Josephine, La Bola Negra, Le Fox Sur, Look Back, Love of Your Life, Minotaur, Mr. Nelson, Did You Kill People, Paradise Lost, Foolin', Possible Love, Tender Loving Care, The Age of Goodbyes, The Beloved, The Debut, The Housewife, The Julia Set, The Man I Love, The Stunt Driver, The Unknown, What You Want, Your Mother, Your Mother, Your Mother, and Ink. Ink. So Ink is not just showing up at NIF, but it's showing up at TIFF. And that is very interesting to keep an eye on that. Very interesting. Now, TIFF will be running from September 10 to 20. So a tad little later than I remember usually being. So that's going to be interesting. And I've been telling you people over and over again, award season is just around the corner. But that is a very interesting and curious thing. And I think that there's a possibility that there's still more to come to be announced for TIFF. Now, remember how I talked about Ink and how it was getting into Venice and TIFF? And quite frankly, at this point, I think it might even show up at NYFF, but they just haven't announced it yet. Well, that's where things could get a little interesting because it could be among a very interesting crop for another film festival. Per Matt Neglia of Next Best Picture, because of the way that things were worded for these slates that have been announced, especially for TIFF, he tweeted that he believes that the films that are going to tell you, or at least some of them, not all of them, are Alpha Gang, Club Kid, The Debut, Elsinore, Everest, The Other Side, Fjord, Gentle Monster, La Bola Negra, A Long Winter, Minotaur, Tender Loving Care, Tensing, and Ink. Now, Telluride, which is my personal favorite of all the film festivals, because a lot of films that show up there go on to get Best Picture. There's a very interesting, the audience award that you get at TIFF is interesting, but there's a very interesting situation there with where they actually poll critics on what was their favorites, which could give you a heads up on what they're going to be pushing when we get to the critic regional groups. That is going to be very, very fascinating to me. That Ink is gonna is getting treated the way it is, especially given that Netflix has La Bola Negra. So very, very exciting to see these fall festivals start to really come together. We know what the Venice opener is. We know what the NIF opener is going to be. We've got a lot of the slate of TIFF announced, and we can now start to figure out what's probably going to show up at Telluride. Very, very exciting. Award season is so much closer than people want to give it credit for, and that's why next week I will be doing a post Odyssey release summer blockbuster season update to my best picture outlook. And that's what this next week's episode will be basically all that it will be focused on for the most part. Unfortunately, we had another major loss in the industry this past week as Brenda Fricker passed away at the age of 81. She'll probably be best known for most people for playing the Pigeon Lady in the Christmas classic Home Alone 2 Lost in New York, which incidentally, I will say was the first movie I ever watched while on a cruise, but of course, she also won a supporting Oscar for her performance in My Left Foot, which, of course, Daniel Day Lewis won an Oscar for that as well. That was during the 1989 awards season. Beyond those roles, she appeared in a number of other films I grew up with, like Angel in the Outfield comes to mind. Usually in smaller but memorable parts. It's sad news, but look, I'm glad she got to live a long life, and her work will continue to be treasured for generations to come. It's a little sad. We've been losing some really big names in the industry week after week of since I started this podcast. I'm really hoping that I won't have to report on one of these next week. All right, and we've reached that part of the podcast where I can talk about what else has been on my mind that isn't film related. And what else has been on my mind that isn't film related is that the FIFA World Cup final was held yesterday, and Spain outlasted the defending champion Argentina to claim the trophy. Meanwhile, England defeated France to secure third place, which honestly would have been the finals matchup that grabbed my attention more, given the centuries of geopolitical rivalry between those two nations. Again, I am not going to pretend or be performative and claim to be a soccer guy, but as an observer on the outside looking in, it's quite the spectacle. I can absolutely see why the World Cup is essentially the Super Bowl for basically the rest of the world. Now when it comes to sports, I can turn my attention to the second half of the Major League Baseball season, which my team, the Tampa Bay Rays, in a tough fight with the Yankees for the AL East. But the World Cup is come and gone. It was kind of cool to see some things there, even though I'm not a soccer guy. Once again, congrats to Spain. And that will wrap it up for lucky number 13th episode of the Mendez Movie Report Podcast. Once again, I promise you, hopefully, I can get a proper intro in here. Maybe, hopefully, in time, things will open up where I can cover more than I have been able to. But again, home life makes it near impossible. It's a miracle that I get any of these out there. If you want to find my work, MendezMovieReport.com. It's very simple as that. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm under all socials under Mendez Movie RPT. And if you want to email me, I'm at author, as in a writer, author L Mendez at gmail.com. Until then, God bless and do me a big favor, especially with the Odyssey out there. Do me a big favor. Go on and see a great movie for me. 4 of my top 5 favorite movies of the year are available at your local cinema if you go and walk to a big local cinema. Go to the movies. It's a great time. There's a lot of good movies out there, even with Moana and Minions and Dead Evil Dead Burn not maybe hitting for crowds anymore. There's plenty of great movies out there. So do me a favor, go see a great movie. God bless. See you next week's episode when we update the outlook for the Best Picture race.